Hi there, I'm Keith M. Johnston. I'm Professor of Film, Television and Media at the University of East Anglia. In this video, I want to introduce you to some of the history and debates around the role of special and visual effects in the film industry. What I hope to demonstrate here is that while effects work is one of the most dominant areas of contemporary film production, affecting everything from cinematography and mise-en-scène to narrative and audience response, film studies has been slow to fully understand and assess its impact. The key elements I want to raise in this video are around definitions. What do we mean by the terms special and visual effects? I want us to think about history, the prominence of effects work since the birth of cinema, and how that influences contemporary film. We'll look briefly at the SFX VFX industry. How do effects work? Who are the people that do that work? And how has this industry grown to become so dominant? I'll cover some of the main debates around effects. We need to think here about the division between realism and fantasy, or between spectacular imagery and coherent narratives. And finally, we'll think a little bit about audiences. How are special effects and visual effects discussed, debated and critiqued? To start, it is worth being clear about the industry distinction that is made between these two interrelated terms, the special effect and the visual effect. Special effects are, traditionally, those practical or mechanical effects that occur during production, so in front of a camera. This can include everything from makeup to back projection, model and miniature work, or even something like explosions or the creation of wind effects. Visual effects are those effects that are most often done in post-production. This would have been optical effects in the pre-digital age, as well as those created by computer-generated imagery. Generally, this covers anything not captured on a set using photographic techniques. There is, of course, a large crossover between these two areas. Many effects are captured live on set and then enhanced via optical or digital technologies. The use of motion capture in the Lord of the Rings trilogy or the Planet of the Apes films required both production and post-production elements, with the performance of actors on set being captured by cameras and then translated into a digital creature. But for now, let's use these broad definitions. Special effects are practical and done in front of a camera, and visual effects are done post-production and generally computer-based. I'm also going to borrow some additional ideas from the film academics Dan North, Bob Rehat and Michael Duffy. They suggested that one reason why audiences and film studies scholars continue to be uncertain about how to talk about effects is because of the sheer range and diversity of techniques covered under this banner term, special effects. They suggest we should think about effects within phases of production, given that different techniques crop up at different stages of a film being produced. They suggest we look at construction, so largely the production, the pre-visualization and kind of the imagination that goes into those initial moments. They then talk about screen appearance. What do we see when we look at the films? What is diegetic? What is filmic? How does it relate to issues around the narrational or the visual? Finally, they talk about the discursive, the cultural elements, the appreciation or remembrance of specific effects or techniques. In this video, I will largely talk about the first two aspects, but we might talk a bit more about the discursive option if you come to the follow-up session I'm running. Before we get into the history and some of the debates that have emerged around special and visual effects, it is worth situating those in relation to the film industry and the people who produce effects. Unlike other aspects of film production, so the writer, the producer or the director, the people who produce these effects are often unknown or at least unheralded. Who is responsible for what? What do the thousands of names that scroll past at the end of a film really do? When effects work can be distributed across departments or across teams in different countries, our lack of awareness of individual work can lead us to thinking this is technical rather than creative labour. Yet if we regard film as a collaborative art form, then what does it mean when there are thousands of largely unknown individuals who have as much responsibility for a film's imagery, its look, its mise-en-scène, as the director, the cinematographer, or the producer? While it may be impossible to understand every role, we cannot rule out the impact of effects work on everything we see and everything we analyse in a film. In companies such as Marvel or Lucasfilm, pre-visualization will often start before scripts are written or directors appointed, with writers and directors working around already developed visual sequences and concepts. So effects is a crucial part of film labour, even if it is not well understood. Alongside this, if we take the example here in Britain, the success of our national film industries is highly dependent on the amount of post-production visual effects work that goes on across the country. So, if special and visual effects are everywhere, in almost every film, if effects can be understood as a creative contribution to mise-en-scène and narrative, and if effects work functions as the backbone of our national film and media industries, how do we start identifying and discussing them? How do we learn the relevant language to talk about and analyse effects work in film? Whether you go to see Wicked, Paddington, or the latest Star Wars or Marvel films, the central role of effects work is visible on the screen. Yet it isn't just when we watch blockbusters that it is important to understand effects work. Spotting such work when it is spectacular is easy, but can lead to a tendency where we overlook effects that are designed to recreate something real or do something more subtle. For example, most historical dramas have utilised effects, helping to recreate the time period of the story being shown, whether that is ancient Rome, 18th century Paris, or 1940s London. In these examples from My Cousin Rachel from 2016, you can see in the upper image the shot that was done on location, and then below that, how effects have just added additional snow and expanded the image to make it look more wintry. Again, here the top image is shot on location, the bottom image has added this vast city in the background to give us a real sense of the location the film is taking place within. And here a more traditional use of green screen, where on set the windows are looking out only onto this green backing, and then digitally a sky has been added to give us a sense of this place existing in the real world. Despite these examples, it is true to say that most understandings of the history of special effects are rooted in genres that have foregrounded cinematic visual spectacle. The history of special effects is as old as cinema itself. We can look back at the trick photography of the French filmmaker Georges Méliès in the late 19th and early 20th century. He utilised stop-action camera, model work, miniatures, double exposures, matte techniques and filtered photography to dramatise tales of magic, illusion and, most famously, a trip to the moon. In 1927, a German film like Metropolis used scale models, back projection, mirror shots and stop-frame animation to create its futuristic vision of a vast city-state controlled by a political elite, but powered by a toiling working class. Equally, in 1933, King Kong combined stop-motion photography of miniature models with rear projection to allow its giant ape to rampage across an island and then through Manhattan. These examples, and there are many more we could look at, all fueled and influenced the development of key film genres such as fantasy, horror and science fiction, genres that are probably more prevalent in film production today than at any other point in film history, and which are fueled by the continual development of special and visual effects techniques. What all these films have in common is the desire to use special and visual effects to combine the fantastic and the realistic, to depict something incredible and spectacular in ways that root those images in some version of a world we can recognise. That was as true then with stop-motion models and miniatures as it is today with computer-generated imagery or motion capture. At the same time, filmmakers often struggle to find that balance between the spectacular image and its place and purpose within the film narrative. A common criticism of blockbuster films since the 1970s is that such effects-based images are distractions, that they don't develop or inform the narrative enough. This has been described as creating films as roller coaster rides, more interested in sharp drops and sudden thrilling moments than narrative depth. To put that in film studies terms, we would describe this as a cinema of attractions, where visual attraction is favoured over a coherent story. The idea that a film will pause its narrative for an exciting effects-powered sequence, rather than build the effects fully into the narrative. These are criticisms that were applied in earlier decades, but really grew in prominence during the 1970s and 1980s blockbuster phase of the new Hollywood, and particularly around the films of George Lucas and Steven Spielberg, and those who emulated them. In more recent years, this criticism has grown even more prevalent, with key franchises such as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Star Wars, the Fast and the Furious or Jurassic World being regularly accused of a tendency to foreground spectacular explosions and fantastic worlds over coherent narratives or convincing characters. It has equally been linked to a dumbing down of cinema, a claim that cinema audiences are being fed empty spectacle rather than anything more cohesive or narratively deep. To develop this concept, and to return to that earlier point about the balance of fantasy and realism, I want to conclude with some examples from recent British films. These are all taken from the showreels of two contemporary visual and post-production houses in the UK, Framestore and Blue Bolt. What I think these images and clips demonstrate is the range of visual techniques that are used within modern British film production, but they also show the importance of that combination of the physical, practical special effect and the optical, digital visual effect. And they reveal how difficult it is to talk about realism and spectacle when applying that to a wide range of films. In the Paddington films, for example, while creating a CGI bear and making him walk around is clearly about fantastic and visual spectacle, the films also go to great lengths, using the combination of special and visual effects, to make us believe he exists in a realistic world. In the case of more historically based films such as The Secret Garden and The Great, those worlds are hugely expanded and enhanced by the use of sometimes subtle and sometimes major effects work. Unlike Paddington, these are not seen as spectacular, or at least not seen in quite the same way, and are designed to complement a narrative where historical accuracy is seen as important, both to film production and audience response. Finally, this example from The Night Manager, which is television rather than film, but there is massive crossover between these two industries, we can see how effects work can add to a sequence in ways we might never have imagined. To conclude this video then, let's return to some of the main issues I raised at the beginning. If special and visual effects appear in almost all films, how can we best understand and talk about the impact they have on narrative and mise-en-scène? How might a fuller understanding of industry definitions and effects-based labour help us develop better skills in identifying those techniques? How can we understand the importance of that creative labour in light of dominant ideas of the director as a film's author? How can a broader history of effects, techniques and debates help us understand current industry practice? How have debates around realism and fantasy or spectacle and narrative coherence shaped our understanding of effects-based films? And finally, how do audiences discuss, debate and criticise the use of effects in film, either historically or today? So this has been a very brief overview of some of these issues, but I think identifying these key areas has been useful, and I look forward to talking to some of you about this more in our follow-up seminar. Thank you.